Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to this Facebook Live at lunchtime. And today we are looking at adopting older children. I'm Grace Gomez, and I am the Adopter Recruitment Officer for PACT Charity. And I'm joined this afternoon by Rhi and David, who very kindly agreed to share their story with us. So welcome, Rhi and David, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you.
Okay, so firstly, can I just ask you both, why did you decide to adopt?
I think there were a couple of options available to us in terms of starting a family, and we had quite a broad view of what a family meant. And adoption was one of those. And we've been doing a bit of research, and and we just one day we were just sitting there and going, right, that's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing.
And we just started having the conversation. It had always been something like in the back of both of our minds.
Yeah, we had several options, but then the one option that always seemed to crop up right back from the early stages of when we were looking at families and so on was adoption. So it was one of the things on the radar, definitely.
Okay, thank you. So was it always your plan to adopt an older child?
It was kind of one of those things that you've got an idea in your head of what you think adoption might be, but like contemporary adoption is so different from the idea in your head. And I remember going to I'm so bad for how I found PACT actually. So I went to our local one, and I looked at it, and it had an Ofsted report, and I was like, adoption charities can get Ofsted reports, and I was like, I wonder what some of the best ones are. And I found PACT. So I was like, I was already doing that like mum thing of scoping out the schools with best Ofsted. And then I looked at the PACT website, and you had all that information, and with that whole point about the different processes for different kinds of kids and different kinds of kids' needs, and like all those beautiful pictures of different kinds of families. And I remember saying to David, well, there's different kind of issues you're facing depending on the age, and what are your views regarding an older child? And I was like, I don't have a problem with an older child. I think we're slightly older. I'm in my 40s, David's in his 50s. We both work, and we would have been putting a child in kind of daycare and stuff like that, so we were kind of we were open to it. The idea of the family we had in our head was not necessarily, and that's not true for everyone, like a baby. We were thinking, us going on holidays and going on the swings and going places, and so we had the idea we had was actually of an older child. We didn't kind of have that idea of a little baby in our head.
Okay, thank you. And so how did you find the whole adoption process?
It was
long. I think we were discussing this. I mean, we always discuss things and so on. It was long, complicated, but understandable. And understandably why it was so complicated. Initially, you kind of sort of think, oh well, we've got to do this, and we've got to check this, and they've got to do that, and then we've got to do that, and then we've got to read the report and so on. And it was a case of, I think, coming into it, you sort of, if you don't do the research and you don't think about it, then it seems a bit of a burden and a bit of a chore. But when you actually think about it, and when we discussed it with our social worker and so on and talking things through, it made complete sense.
I remember standing there when she was in the house during lockdown, which we'll probably talk about in a minute, and just going, oh, thank God they made us use a year to do it, to work through the process. The bit with PACT was
pretty smooth.
We had the training, we did the different, and it was really clear where you were at. It got a little bit more sticky, and I think everyone will say this, when you're actually going through the agencies bit and you're dealing with local authorities that are overstretched. That PACT have been through, we just, our social worker Nadine, she called us just after the formal adoption went through, so it was probably about 2 years, from about a year to the point that our daughter was placed with us, and then about a year, and that was a year during pandemic. So to the point that we, formally adopted her, and her name was changed and everything, which happened in about February this year. But Nadine was with us through everything. She's absolutely incredible. It's like, now I know I can hug people again. I want to find Nadine to give her the biggest hug. So incredible.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. And so, how was the linking and matching process managed during the pandemic, and how did you find it?
Oh, that's the bit that's always a bit hazy, because you get the process and you get like expression of interest and then training and then match, the adoption panel, and then you've got an amazing like family matcher, but she's her name's completely gone out of my head, but she's like really like, right, I am going to keep you on track. We got this one. She's really, really good. And she also doesn't let you kind of get, sometimes people are really desperate to place kids for the right reasons, but they might not be kind of 100% upfront about some of the challenges, because they're trying to kind of get you involved. And she's really good about saying, no, I think maybe they're not telling you the whole story with this. So we went on we've signed up for the website, which name has also gone out my head now, you know it. And it's really weird, because you put in, it's like a dating site or something, where you're like, I am looking for, and we were like, a girl in England and Wales and Scotland, age between these ages, and then you get all these adorable kids, and they're all gorgeous, and then they're all like, I love teddies and stuff like that, and it's just, oh man, it is hard. And then it's even harder when you see a child that you kind of feel a connection with, and a lot of that is, our daughter's foster nan, who's an incredible woman, wrote a lot of the material. And you really, part of the reason we linked with our daughter, I keep going to say her name, is because you really got a sense of who she was, of her personality, and how she would gel with our family. With some of them, it is really kind of vague. Sometimes they've like paid for photo shoots, and so there's these poor little kids in suits kind of going like this. But you go through it and then you connect. And, we had a couple of examples where we got then the full case files, and we were reading these really, really hard stories. And then we were realizing, for various reasons, that there was something where like proximity was actually going to cause a bit of danger. And, we had to say no, and it was just so hard. But our daughter, I think we might be quite rare, but we saw her and we were just like, she's ours straight away. I think you had like a dream that weekend or something. It was all a bit spooky, but we totally knew. And so her local authority, they're not the best, but they're dealing with some issues, and they took a long time to get back to us. And we were just going, can we ask? We've been asking, please, can we ask? And then very suddenly they came up and they were like, yeah, we're really interested. And we kind of got approved as a potential match. And then we were able to meet her they do these days where you can go along and meet kids, which are, they're a lot, but it was useful for us because we'd already been potentially matched. And we dealt with a lot of kind of radio silence and messing around stuff. PACT were fantastic at chasing, but it's tough. They're understaffed. They're under a lot of pressure.
I think the biggest thing is that, and it's not PACT's fault, as I said, as Rhi was saying, there is that radio silence when you express an interest. So you've got the hope, and you've got the happiness and hope in your heart, and then there's just silence, and the social worker will get back and say, I've asked them again, etc., etc. Don't worry, it's that they've got a lot of pressures, they're just getting things together. And then you're constantly thinking about it, constantly, I hope, have they heard, have they emailed you, etc., etc. But in the end, it's all worth it.
It's like house hunting or dating, but times a million, because you're thinking, this is going to be my child.
Yeah.
That's the only way. It's the oddest experience.
But it's great your social worker was on hand to reassure you through the
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
process.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
and give us some
100%.
guidance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
100%.
Okay, so how old was your daughter when you became a family?
5.5.
5.5.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like meeting her for the first time and her homecoming?
It was kind of funny because she says afterwards, because we met her at this day and we were playing with her, and I think she claimed she thought we were from the circus because we were at this circus event with
They
her.
had a circus
Yeah.
there, so yeah.
It was really good because she was older. The advice we'd got is that we would do a lot more meetings. And so we were traveling to see her. Luckily the distance wasn't too great. Yeah. So we were seeing her a lot. Retrospectively, maybe a bit more than they would have normally advised. But actually then suddenly, there's this, everybody's getting this strange cough. And then we were trying to ignore that because we were dealing with adoption. And then they moved the placement forward. Her school had been closed. She was in reception. And then
and then
the lockdown got announced.
Yeah, the lockdown got announced on the Wednesday, and we'd already moved everything forward, so we went down to stay for a week for transitions. So we would have gone down there. We stayed in a small cottage near where she was living. And we would go and spend the day with her and go and spend the week with her, and then the transition process would move over. I think it was a week afterwards.
Yeah, they would have had a week up here.
They would have a week up here and so on. So it would have all been gradual, but unfortunately lockdown hit, and it was a case of it's Friday or September, October, November.
All her stuff, all her toys.
Stuff,
I mean, it's going to break my heart till the day I die. Just the image of her just sitting there surrounded by her teddies, kind of having to say goodbye to a foster family that she'd lived with for 2 years as well. And we've kept in contact with them, and that was kind of part of the contact agreement, and they've been really helpful. But that was tough. And that's not normal. That's not what will happen. The social worker will be able to come into the house with you, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that would have happened under normal circumstances that didn't happen with us. But we survived it, so it's like if you can survive that version, you can survive the supported version.
So what was it like when she actually came home with you in those first days?
It was surreal because she luckily she'd managed to visit and see the house. It had been a lot. She hadn't been able to sleep the night before, and she just went like, ah! And then after crying, she was just like, okay, let's go to the park, and I want to go on the swings, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. And we just had a conversation with her because she was older. She was kind of homesick and stuff, and she realized that, and we just had to talk about what that might be. We did a lot of kind of prepping her room, giving her night lights, talking about what she might do if she needed a wee in the middle of the night, all that kind of stuff. So we did a lot of work, and it just got easier and easier every day, and she just kind of, it was just that initial wrench, and it was like, it was a big lockdown kind of made it as traumatic as they could have done.
But
nobody can control.
That was literally right at the start. So that was completely out of the blue, completely not normal, and not the way that it would be. So
but people talk about taking a baby home from the hospital and suddenly it hitting them that this is their child and they are completely responsible for them. With older child, it's weird because they're standing there and asking you questions. And I think it's Sally Donovan's book, she talks about like waking up and her son just being there like, can I have a drink? And she's like, it's a bit surreal. It takes a while, and you just have these moments of like, oh god, there.
Okay, so have there been any additional considerations you have to think about when adopting an older child, would you say?
I'd say, some people have a misconception that it's really kind of problematic thinking about adoptive kids, but that if you get them new from the showroom, then they're not going to have any trauma or any issues. And that's not true. You can get in utero trauma. I mean, our daughter experienced that, even though she was adopted older. They're more aware of some of the things that have happened to them. So, you know, life story work is something that kind of starts from the get-go. You know, and they may have, you know, for us, she called us for a while. We were Rhi and David, and then it was Daddy David and Mummy Rhi. And then one day when we said, "Oh, you're coming on Friday with us," she just went, "Oh, my mummy and my daddy." But that was a bit of a thing, and I think for some kids, I mean, the mummy daddy thing is tricky because sometimes they've had a person who calls themselves mummy who is like the most dangerous person in their lives. So there's certain things with that, like not knowing what is going to trigger her. But even with an older kid, sometimes it's quite subconscious. I mean, don't assume that they can speak about everything. There's parts of my daughter's life that are quite patchy, you know, that she's kind of subsumed in a memory somewhere. School, you have to go straight for the school thing, but pupil premium, you don't have to go on a waiting list, you know. The one upside.
That's, I mean, that's the thing with school. It's a case of you just don't realize, it suddenly hits you. You know, we were in lockdown, so we were looking at this a couple of months after that we actually adopted, and then we got into contact with the school and they were absolutely fine about it. But again, it's other things with the school.
Yeah, it's tricky because it's your child's story and you're not supposed to share that much. But if you've suddenly got a 6-year-old and you've never had a 6-year-old before, it's not taking Sherlock Holmes to figure out that something has happened somewhere along the way. I mean, I think if you show up with a baby, it's a slightly different setup. And so a bit of the kind of cloak and dagger around adoption is tricky, also because they, you know, she tells people she's, you know, that's just part of her life, or she says, because she's, you know, 6, she just says cryptic things and other kids are like, what, where did you live, who is this, is this my, and you know, so she's like, at the beginning she was talking about new mummy and daddy, and for like other kids her age, it's like, what on earth is that? I think the other thing is like, when there are behavioural issues, which there are with all kids, and kids who've experienced developmental trauma particularly have a hard time regulating emotions, is they're just like this so much smarter at that age. And so we've had, I think we were joking beforehand about like some weird conversations where I was threatened with going to the police because my daughter said that if people get too warm and they can't have ice lollies, then they die, and that would make me a murderer. And it's like, you're not really gonna, you're just gonna get like scream out of you know, and she will just, she is so smart, she will argue till argue the sky is green. But also actually, I mean, sometimes they are very little, and we do say to her, "Are you feeling little today?" There's a book, No Matter What, that we use, and it says Small was feeling like little and sad and mad, and sometimes she's, you know, the cry she's giving is really the cry of a very small child that wants their mummy, that wants a blankie, that wants a, you know, wants a cwtch, sorry, cuddle, in Welsh. It's a you that can be tricky because sometimes they're presenting almost like they're, you know, sometimes like they're 14, because if they've lived in houses with older kids as well, they're like, sometimes they try and put on the attitude, and then the next minute you're going, are you all right? And they're just like, and it's, you know, they go very small again. So sometimes you're dealing with these like time shifts. I
think it's really interesting. Thank you. So how did you prepare your extended family for the arrival of your daughter?
That was a tough one.
That was a tough one because it was during the pandemic.
Yeah, sure.
So it was, I mean, I think my family live a lot further, obviously with my accent, my family live a lot further away than Rhi's mother and father. So it was all really wrapped around all the COVID restrictions and when they would be lifted, etc. And there were short time windows that you can do.
6-year-olds don't really do Zoom either.
Yeah.
But in terms of like before we even got to the adoption, I think there were anxieties because you know, I think with my family we didn't know anyone who'd been adopted, and I think it's I think there would have been anxieties about having, you know, starting a family anyway.
Sure.
So I mean, partially it was about reading about people's experiences. So I've got my little book file here, but this is an amazing book, No Matter What, by Sally Donovan. Get people to read this. Also get them to listen to BBC's The Adoption podcast. That is incredible. Maybe, I mean, when you adopt, maybe listen to something like the Therapeutic Parenting podcast, but maybe don't listen to it in advance because you just be dealing with too much stuff. But the other one was Meant to Be by Lisa Faulkner. And I think that's really I think that's really useful for people who identify as women, you know, in terms of the journey towards starting a family as well. That's a really good book. But we suggested that, and yeah, it was reading, and you know, the PACT friends and family thing. We suggested to people were like, oh, it's a long way, and it's, oh, do we really need it? We've read the flyer. There's flyers. We got flyers from Timpson's. Weirdly, Timpson's, you know, like the shoe repair, cutting people. They're really big. I think because they've done a lot of fostering and the owner was fostered. He's got these little kind of guides to like developmental trauma and adoption and stuff, like little handy guides. So go into Timpson's and ask if they've got things, because they're really handy, like little graphic novels. But PACT have some as well, and they run sessions. And I was a bit skeptical about how the understanding would change, because we'd obviously been reading lots of stuff, and my parents went in and they were quite isolated because they didn't know other adopted grandparents, and you're like, you know, it's how do you kind of connect with people about that and find language to talk about it. And they went in and they'd been chatting with all these other grandparents and, you know, extended family members, and they came out and they were just like, oh, and this thing and this thing and this thing, and they, you know, and they've been reading up, and you know, they became kind of that event in terms of creating a sense of community and having a community around adoption, especially where it's something where, God, well, this last year has been particularly hard for like going to things and meeting people, but that's the hard thing. You know, if you give birth, you know, you've got your NCT and you've got all this stuff. With adoption, it's tricky, and it's even trickier for, you know, the extended family who don't kind of go to the training in the same way. And so that was a useful thing for them. And yeah, they like the kind of sort of lighter end of the guides. So another book recommendation. They love this. They're doing these as flashcards now. The Quick Guide to Therapeutic Parenting, and it's all little cartoons that teach you simple basic principles of things like PACE, and it's good for parents as well, because some of the books are basically designed for social workers and psychologists, and they can be a bit much, but yeah, quick and easy ones like this are really good.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, what would you say to anybody who was considering adopting an older child?
I mean, definitely go for it. I'd say don't think that you're missing out on things. Think about the things that you want to do. Think about the kind of life you want to have as a family. I mean, it's never going to be exactly as you plan. I mean, whose life is really? But you get firsts. She lost her first tooth when she was with us.
Exactly. She lost her first
incredible.
tooth. She rode a bike. She managed to ride the bike without stabilizers. She went on a 2-wheel scooter. So she went to school. So it's a case of there's nothing that you don't miss, because every day is different. It's tough. It is tough, because adopting any child is tough, and so on. But at the same time, it's you get all these firsts, and that's the things to celebrate.
Yeah, and I mean, your kid's not always going to be on. Our daughter is in, she's kind of hitting school targets and things like that, but she's still got kind of issues that she needs support with. But we're talking about these big things like riding a bike. But I was talking to another adopted mum the other day, and sometimes it can just be the littlest things, like the tiniest little steps forward, like giving someone a hug that they haven't wanted to before and stuff like that. And so it's really being aware and being sensitive to that child, and it's it's making that connection. But yeah, it's definitely it's incredible. It's changed our lives, for the better, even if we do look like very tired people. I think that's just being parents during lockdown.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We've had quite a few questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
That's come in. So people have asked about volunteering. Did you do any voluntary work with older children throughout the process?
We didn't, because of our jobs. We've done quite a lot of stuff. So I used to, like, for years I was a kind of arts and crafts tutor and stuff like that. But I know a lot of people who have, and they found it
useful.
Yeah, and I know somebody who's going through it at the moment, and she volunteered with kids with additional needs, and she found that really useful in terms of thinking about, because you get this list of like, what are you, in terms of additional needs, what can you deal with, and that's really hard, because people are not a list of needs and disabilities or illnesses. They're whole human beings. And so actually seeing kids who are who have diverse needs and being able to go, they're incredible, and seeing what they can do and what they are able to bring. A friend was saying she found that really useful. And so not necessarily just going to your local kind of Girl Guides group, but thinking about those kind of links.
Somebody asked a question about the first, and you gave loads of them. That was great. So the other question is, what do you feel was the biggest benefit to adopting an older child?
Trying to think. It's
biggest benefit. I think because we always had an older child in mind. I can't really think of the benefit to. We
had a lot of information, which I think is different from other groups. I think she also kind of came with she came with her own little personality in a way, and I think all kids do. True. And just being able to meet that new person and to have them change your life, because I think a lot of parenting, we think about shaping our child and making them into something, and making them into ourselves. And another adopted mum was saying, I'm basically meeting people who, they come into my life, and people I would have had no contact with otherwise, and thinking about that kind of interconnectedness. That sounds a bit like hippy dippy, but somewhere, it's like on a really deep kind of soul level, the way their little kind of life and mind kind of changes yours. Sorry, that's a vague answer, but it's like, until you've experienced it, it's hard to kind of describe.
Thank you. Okay then, somebody's asked, did you find it more useful to have more information than you seem to get about an older child rather than a very young baby? So as you said, she was older, so you probably had a lot more information when you were doing your family finding.
It was really useful, but I think even when you do have a lot of information, there's still going to be gaps. And you do sometimes, living with uncertainty and complexity is like, it's really hard, especially as I'm someone who's organized, and I want to have like the folder with all the information, and just being able to kind of go, okay, so we're never going to know about this. I think that was really useful, because we knew what her needs were going to be, and we could prep it, and we could like identify a school. Whereas I think sometimes people with birth children, or with kind of adopted younger children, can have this idea in their head of what normal is going to look like, and then it gets completely thrown on their head. And I've got friends who've suddenly realized they're having to deal with things that they didn't think they were going to. So in a way, you go in pre-warned is pre-armed. It doesn't solve every issue, but being able to have a conversation as well. I mean, you're not having it like a therapy level, but being able to say, wow, you find bedtimes really hard, don't you? I wonder whether it's because this thing happened when you were little. And you can see them going,
processing.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, whereas, you know, with younger, not so much.
Okay. Just one last question. Somebody's asked about adoption leave. Did that affect you too, as we're in lockdown and with your jobs and things?
We did it in a really complicated way. We did shared adoption leave because we actually work for the same employer, and so we were able to do it. I remember when we went for the kind of initial meeting, and they were like, "Oh, we've never known anyone be able to work that out." I'd say for an older child, if you can do shared adoption leave, that's great. Because depending on their life history, they might have different relationships with men versus women, and you know, regardless of like what your kind of actual setup is, if you're a single adopter or whatever. Being able to kind of, if you're adopting as a couple, if you can have both members there, even if one of you is going to be slightly more responsible for childcare. We always had it kind of divvied down. We were always going to share childcare down the middle. And so we did shared adoption leave. We're actually working with someone to try and bring in, who's another PACT adopter, to bring in some changes in our workplace, because just be pre-warned that HR can be lovely, but the forms can be awful and very
if the forms
heteronormative, and
if the forms haven't been updated for a few years, it can the forms can look very bizarre, and so on.
I had to fill out a form that said form for mother/adopter, which isn't it's not great for, and you know, and it was for primary adopter, which could, you know, could be male or female, so or non-binary. So
you know, as Rhi said, it's if you can get shared adoption leave, fantastic. I think it was probably made slightly easier because we were in the same company. The same business, but I think I do remember that it can be worked, but the companies have to, or your workplace bosses have to get in contact with each other and so on.
And if you're thinking, oh, they'll be in school, so that'll be fine. I mean, obviously, like we got thwarted by COVID, but you know, they say no, you're still doing that kind of hard work all the time, and it's because you're building a relationship with someone. And imagine, like, if you were in a kind of romantic relationship with someone, the amount of time you'd be putting into kind of getting to know them and stuff like this. And this is somebody who's your child. And so I remember thinking, oh well, aren't they off and stuff? And it's just like sheerly, you know, sheer for being able to put your feet up. Well, which we couldn't do because we had to homeschool, but I had to teach myself phonics in about 10 minutes while she was asleep one night.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Really appreciate it. It's been really insightful. Thank you very much. So if you want more information, please go to our website, pactcharity.org, and follow us on social media or scan the QR code. All our upcoming information events are online, and you can have a look on our website for those. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.